The first thing I noticed was the sound of the plow blade scraping asphalt at 4 in the morning. Not the road, my driveway. The vibration came through the bedroom floor, through the bed frame, through my ribs. I pulled on my boots and walked out into the dark with a flashlight. The air was 10 degrees and the snow was still falling in thick, wet clumps. The plow truck was already backing away from the end of my driveway, its yellow strobe light spinning across the trees. But it wasn't the driveway that stopped me cold. It was the swale, the long, shallow drainage ditch that ran along the eastern edge of my property, the one my grandfather had dug by hand in 1972, was buried under a fresh mountain of snow. Not plowed snow from the road, not wind-blown drift. This was a deliberate dump. The pile was 6 feet high and 20 feet long, packed tight and glistening under the strobe light. I stood there in the dark with my flashlight beam cutting across the pile, and I knew exactly what I was looking at. The HOA plow contractor had used my swale as a snow dump. Again, for the 4th time this winter. I turned the flashlight toward the cab of the truck. The driver didn't look at me. He just shifted into gear and rumbled away toward the next cul-de-sac. I didn't chase him. I didn't call out. I walked back inside, poured a cup of coffee, and opened the folder on my kitchen table. The folder was 3 inches thick by then. Photographs, time-stamped, printed emails, a copy of the county drainage map, a copy of my deed, a copy of the HOA covenant, and a copy of the snowplow contract that I had requested from the HOA board 6 weeks earlier and still had not received. I added a new note to the top of the stack. February 14th, 4:12 a.m., 4th snow dump into private swale. Plow truck number 7. Driver did not acknowledge. I closed the folder and looked out the kitchen window at the dark shape of my barn, 200 feet away, where the swale curved around the foundation. The snow pile was already blocking the drainage path. I knew what that meant. I had known since November, but Karen didn't. Karen, the HOA facilities chair, the woman who had told me at the November board meeting that the swale was just runoff and that I should stop being difficult, had no idea what she had actually done. She had no idea that the swale wasn't HOA property. She had no idea that the county drainage map showed it as private, protected, and essential for my barn's flood prevention. And she had absolutely no idea that the plow contract she had signed in October identified the swale as HOA land, which meant she had been ordering snow dumped onto private property for 4 months, and spring was coming. Before I explain what happened when the thaw arrived, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who else has dealt with an HOA that thinks it owns the weather. My name is Lena Carver. I'm 38 years old. I'm a civil engineer, which is going to matter a lot in this story. I live on a 5-acre property in a small, unincorporated township about 40 minutes outside of Madison, Wisconsin. The property has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it in 1968, built the house in 1970, built the barn in 1971, and dug the swale in 1972, after a spring flood nearly washed out the barn foundation. He was a dairy farmer who retired early and spent the last 20 years of his life maintaining every inch of this land with his own hands. I grew up here in the summers. I learned to read a topographic map on this kitchen table. I learned to calculate drainage gradients on this porch. When my grandfather died in 2014, he left the property to me. Not to my parents, not to my siblings, to me, because I was the only one who had ever asked him to explain how the swale worked. The HOA came later. In 2018, a developer bought the old farmland to the north and west of my property and built a subdivision of 42 houses. They called it Meadowbrook Estates. They put in a clubhouse, a pool, a playground, and a homeowners association, with a full set of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. My property was not part of the subdivision. My property predated the subdivision by 50 years. My deed was recorded in 1968. The HOA covenants were recorded in 2018. There was no annexation, no merger, no easement, no shared maintenance agreement. I was not a member of the HOA. I paid no dues. I attended no meetings. I had no vote, and I had no obligation to comply with their rules. But that didn't stop them from trying. The first contact came in the spring of 2019, 6 months after the first houses were sold. A letter arrived in my mailbox, printed on HOA letterhead, signed by the board president at the time, a man named Gerald Fisk. The letter informed me that my barn was visible from the Meadowbrook Estates clubhouse patio and that its rustic appearance was inconsistent with the community aesthetic standards. It requested that I paint the barn within 60 days. I wrote back a polite letter explaining that my property was not part of the HOA and that I would not be painting the barn. I included a copy of my deed and a copy of the county parcel map. I received no response. 6 months later, another letter arrived. This one was from the new facilities chair, a woman named Karen Whitmore. The letter informed me that the HOA had received complaints about water runoff from my property, affecting the subdivision's stormwater system. It requested that I install a retention basin at my own expense. I wrote back another polite letter explaining that my property's drainage system, including the swale, had been designed in 1972 and approved by the county, and that any runoff issues in the subdivision were likely caused by the subdivision's own development, which had paved over 30 acres of absorbent farmland. I included a copy of the county drainage map and a copy of the 1972 permit. I received no response. For 2 years, nothing happened. I assumed the HOA had finally understood that I was not under their jurisdiction. I was wrong. In October of 2022, Karen Whitmore was re-elected as facilities chair. She ran on a platform of protecting community infrastructure and ensuring compliance with drainage standards. At the first board meeting after the election, she proposed a new snow removal contract for the upcoming winter. The contract included a provision that snow plowed from the subdivision's roads would be deposited in designated snow storage areas along the perimeter of the development. One of those designated areas was my swale. I didn't know this at the time. I found out later, when I finally got a copy of the contract. But I knew something was wrong the first time I saw the plow truck. It was November 18th, the first significant snowfall of the season, 6 inches overnight. I woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of the plow and walked outside to find a fresh pile of snow dumped directly into the swale. The pile was only about 3 feet high and 10 feet long. Not enough to block the drainage path completely, but enough to make me very concerned. I took photographs. I noted the date and time. I called the HOA management office and left a message asking who was responsible for the snow removal contract and why snow was being dumped on my property. The next day, I received a call from Karen Whitmore. Her voice was bright and polished and completely dismissive. "Mrs. Carver, this is Karen Whitmore from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I understand you have a concern about the snow removal. I want to assure you that our contractor is following the approved snow management plan. The area where the snow is being deposited is designated for runoff management. It's just runoff. There's no damage being done. I'd ask you not to interfere with the plow operations. It's for the safety of the community." I told her that the swale was on my private property and that dumping snow into it would block the drainage path and potentially cause flooding when the snow melted. She laughed. Not a mean laugh, a condescending laugh. The kind of laugh that says, "I've dealt with difficult people before and I know how to handle them. Mrs. Carver, I've reviewed the plat maps. The drainage area is part of the community's stormwater infrastructure. It's not private property, but I appreciate your concern. If you have any documentation that says otherwise, you're welcome to submit it to the board for review." I told her I would do exactly that. I hung up and opened the folder. I already had the documentation. I had the county drainage map. I had my deed. I had the 1972 permit. I had the parcel boundary survey from 2015. Every single document showed the same thing. The swale was on my land, within my property lines, and had been for 50 years. But I didn't submit anything to the board. Not yet. Because I had learned something over the years of dealing with HOAs and developers and entitled neighbors. When someone tells you to submit documentation, they're not asking for proof. They're asking for ammunition. They want to see what you have so they can figure out how to discredit it. So I didn't submit anything. I put the phone call in the folder. I added a note. November 19th. Karen Whitmore called. Claimed swale is HOA's stormwater infrastructure. Dismissed my concern, asked for documentation, did not provide, and I waited. The snow kept falling, the plow kept dumping. Every significant snowfall between November and February, the plow truck would arrive in the early morning hours and deposit a fresh load of snow into the swale. Sometimes it was a small pile, sometimes it was a mountain. By mid-January, the swale was buried under a continuous ridge of compacted snow and ice that stretched for over 100 feet along the eastern edge of my property. The drainage path was completely blocked. I documented every single dump. I took photographs from multiple angles. I recorded the date, time, and approximate volume of each deposit. I noted the plow truck number when I could see it. I measured the snow depth with a marked stake I had driven into the ground at the edge of the swale in November. By February 14th, The stake was buried under 7 feet of packed snow and ice. I also documented the HOA's responses, or lack of responses. After the phone call from Karen, I sent 3 emails to the HOA management office, each one politely requesting a copy of the snow removal contract and the snow management plan. I received automated replies, but no actual information. I sent a certified letter to the board president, requesting the same documents under the Wisconsin Open Records Law, since the HOA was a registered nonprofit corporation. The letter was signed for on January 8th. I received no response. I attended the February board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, a large beige building with a stone fireplace and a wall of windows overlooking the pool. About 30 residents were there. I sat in the back row with my folder on my lap. Karen Whitmore sat at the front table with the other board members. She was in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair, a tailored blazer, and the kind of posture that comes from years of being in charge of something. She had a clipboard in front of her and a laminated map of the subdivision propped on an easel beside the table. When the meeting opened for resident comments, I stood up and introduced myself. I explained that snow from the subdivision's roads was being dumped onto my private drainage swale, and that I was concerned about flooding when the snow melted. I asked for a copy of the snow removal contract and the snow management plan. Karen smiled at me from the front table. It was the same condescending smile I had heard over the phone. "Mrs. Carver, thank you for your concern. As I explained to you in November, the drainage area in question is part of the community's stormwater infrastructure. The snow removal operations are being conducted in accordance with our approved plan. There's no cause for alarm." I asked her to show me the approved plan. She tapped her clipboard. "The plan is on file with the management office. It's available for review by HOA members." I told her I wasn't an HOA member. I told her my property was not part of the subdivision. I told her the swale was on my private land. Her smile didn't waver. "Mrs. Carver, I've reviewed the plat maps. The drainage corridor is clearly marked as common area. If you have documentation that contradicts the plat, you're welcome to submit it to the board for review." The same phrase. Submit it to the board for review. I looked around the room. The residents were watching me with a mixture of curiosity and mild annoyance. I was the outsider, the person who didn't belong, the person who was making a fuss about snow. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Thank you for your time. I'll follow up in writing." I sat down. Karen moved on to the next agenda item. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. I sat in the back row and watched Karen present her facilities report. She talked about the snow removal contract with obvious pride. She mentioned that the contractor had been very responsive and that the snow storage areas were performing as designed. She did not mention that one of those storage areas was on my property. After the meeting, I walked out to the parking lot. The night was cold and clear. The snow piles along the edges of the lot were stained brown with road salt. I stood beside my truck and looked toward the dark shape of my barn, visible beyond the subdivision's perimeter fence. The swale was out there, buried under months of accumulated snow, waiting for the thaw. I drove home and added the meeting notes to the folder. February 20th, board meeting. Karen repeated claim that swale is HOA common area. Refused to provide contract. Told me to submit documentation. I did not submit. And then I did something that Karen didn't expect. I stopped contacting the HOA. I stopped sending emails. I stopped attending meetings. I stopped asking for the contract. I went quiet because I had realized something important. The snow was going to melt. It didn't matter what Karen said. It didn't matter what the board believed. It didn't matter what the plat map showed. When the snow melted, the water was going to go somewhere. And if the swale was blocked, the water was going to go into my barn. That was physics. That was hydrology. That was inevitable. And when it happened, I was going to have 4 months of documentation showing exactly who was responsible. So I waited. March arrived. The temperatures started to rise. The snow began to melt. Slowly at first, a trickle of water here and there. The packed snow in the swale started to settle and compact. The drainage path was still completely blocked. By the second week of March, the daytime temperatures were consistently above 40 degrees. The melt accelerated. Water started pooling at the upstream end of the snow blockage. A shallow pond formed in the low spot between the swale and the barn. I measured it every day. March 12th, 6 inches deep, 10 feet wide. March 14th, 10 inches deep, 15 feet wide. March 16th, 14 inches deep, 20 feet wide. The water was creeping toward the barn foundation. I called my insurance adjuster. Her name is Diane Okonkwo. She's a sharp, practical woman in her 40s who has handled my property insurance for years. I explained the situation. I told her about the snow dumping, the blocked swale, the rising water. I sent her the photographs and the documentation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lena, you've got a problem. If that water gets into the barn, you're looking at foundation damage, mold, possibly structural issues. Do you have flood coverage?" I told her I did. She said, "Good. Keep documenting, and call the county drainage inspector. If the swale is on the county drainage map, they have jurisdiction. They can issue a stop work order or a drainage violation. That's going to be important for your insurance claim." I called the county drainage inspector the next morning. His name is Tom Berglund. He's been working for the county for 30 years. He knows every drainage ditch, culvert, and swale in the township. When I told him my address, he said, "Carver property. Your grandfather dug that swale, didn't he?" I said yes. He said, "I've got the 1972 permit on file." "What's the problem?" I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll be there this afternoon." Tom arrived at 2 o'clock in a county truck with a clipboard and a survey wheel. He walked the entire length of the swale, measuring the snow blockage, the water depth, the distance to the barn. He took photographs. He checked the county drainage map on his tablet. He shook his head. "This is a protected drainage feature," he said. "It's on the county map. It's on your deed. It's not HOA property. Whoever dumped this snow here created an obstruction. That's a violation of the county drainage ordinance." He wrote something on his clipboard. "I'm going to issue a notice of violation to the HOA. They'll have 10 days to remove the obstruction and restore the drainage path. If they don't, the county can do it and bill them for the cost." I asked him if he could also provide a written determination that the swale was private property. He said, "I can do better than that. I can give you a certified copy of the county drainage map with the swale highlighted and a letter stating that it's a private protected feature. That'll hold up in court if you need it." I thanked him. He looked at the water pooling near the barn. "You might want to get a pump out here," he said. "That water's not going to wait 10 days. I called a pump contractor that afternoon. His name is Marcus Webb. He runs a small excavation and drainage company. He arrived the next morning with a diesel pump and 200 feet of discharge hose. He set up the pump at the edge of the pond and started moving water away from the barn toward a low area on the far side of the property. He worked for 6 hours. The water level dropped, but the snow blockage was still there. The swale was still buried, and the melt was still coming. Marcus told me, "I can keep pumping, but until that snow is gone, you're going to keep getting water. You need to get that swale cleared." I told him I was working on it. He nodded. "I've seen this before. HOAs think they can do whatever they want with drainage. They don't understand that water doesn't care about property lines or board meetings. Water goes where water goes, and when you block it, it finds somewhere else to go. Usually somewhere expensive." He looked at the barn. "That's a nice barn. Your grandfather built it?" I said yes. He said, "Let's make sure it stays standing." On March 18th, the county notice of violation was delivered to the HOA management office. I know, because Tom Berglund sent me a copy. The notice stated that the HOA had created an obstruction in a protected drainage feature, that the obstruction was causing flooding on private property, and that the HOA was required to remove the obstruction within 10 days or face fines and potential legal action. I expected Karen to call me. I expected her to be angry or defensive or apologetic. I didn't expect what actually happened. She called an emergency board meeting. I found out about it from one of the residents, a woman named Sarah Chen, who lived in the house closest to my property line. Sarah had been watching the water rise for weeks. She had seen the plow trucks dumping snow into the swale all winter. She had asked Karen about it at the February meeting and been told the same thing I was told. "It's just runoff. It's community infrastructure. Don't worry about it." But Sarah was worried. She called me on March 19th. "Lena, Karen's called an emergency meeting for tonight. She's telling everyone that you're trying to sue the HOA and that the county violation is a misunderstanding. She's saying the swale is HOA property and that you're trespassing by pumping water off of it." I thanked Sarah for the information. I asked her if she would be willing to attend the meeting and take notes. She said she would. Then I called Tom Berglund. I asked him if he would be willing to attend the meeting as well. He said, "I was planning on it. I want to see the look on their faces when I show them the county map." I called Diane Okonkwo. I asked her if she could provide a preliminary damage estimate for the barn flooding. She said she could have it ready by that evening. I called Marcus Webb. I asked him if he could provide a written statement about the pumping operation and the cause of the flooding. He said he'd type something up and bring it to the meeting. And then I called the snowplow contractor. His name is Dale Rigsby. He owns Rigsby Snow Removal, a small company that had been plowing the Meadowbrook Estates roads for 3 winters. I had found his name on the side of the plow truck back in December. I had looked up his phone number but never called. Until now. Dale answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded tired. I introduced myself and explained that I was the owner of the property where his trucks had been dumping snow all winter. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Ma'am, I just do what the contract says. The HOA tells me where to put the snow. I put it there. If there's a problem, you need to talk to them." I asked him if he had a copy of the contract. He said he did. I asked him if the contract identified the snow storage areas. He said it did. I asked him if one of those areas was described as a drainage swale along the eastern perimeter of the subdivision. He said, "Yeah, it's marked on the map they gave me. They said it was HOA property." I asked him if he would be willing to bring a copy of the contract to the emergency board meeting that night. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, I don't want to get in the middle of a fight between you and the HOA. I'm just a plow guy." I told him I understood. I told him I wasn't asking him to take sides. I told him I just wanted the truth to be clear. I told him that the swale was on my private property, that the county had confirmed it, and that the HOA had been dumping snow on my land without my permission for 4 months. I told him that if he brought the contract to the meeting, he could show everyone that he was just following orders, that the responsibility belonged to the person who gave the orders. He was quiet again. Then he said, "What time's the meeting?" The emergency board meeting was held at 7 o'clock in the clubhouse. I arrived at 6:45. The parking lot was already half full. I could see lights on in the clubhouse and people moving around inside. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, going through the folder one last time. The photographs, the emails, the certified letter, the county drainage map, the deed, the 1972 permit, the notice of violation, the insurance estimate, the pump contractor's statement, and the snowplow contract. Dale Rigsby had arrived 10 minutes before me. He was standing by his truck in the parking lot, holding a manila envelope. He looked nervous. I walked over to him. "Thank you for coming," I said. He nodded. "I've been plowing for 20 years, he said. Never had anything like this. They told me it was their property. I didn't know. I told him I believed him. I told him I wasn't blaming him. I told him the person who gave the order was the one who needed to answer for it." He nodded again. We walked into the clubhouse together. The room was full. At least 50 residents were there, more than I had ever seen at a board meeting. They were standing along the walls, sitting in folding chairs, clustered in small groups, talking in low voices. The atmosphere was tense. Karen Whitmore was at the front table with the other board members. She looked composed but alert, like a lawyer waiting for a deposition to start. Her clipboard was in front of her. The laminated map was on the easel. When she saw me walk in, her expression flickered, just for a moment. Then the smile came back. "Mrs. Carver," she said, "I'm glad you could make it. We have a lot to discuss." I didn't smile back. I found a seat in the front row. Dale sat beside me. Tom Berglund sat on the other side of the aisle, wearing his county jacket and holding his own folder. Marcus Webb was in the back, still wearing his work boots. Diane Okonkwo was on the phone in the parking lot, finishing up the damage estimate. Sarah Chen was in the 3rd row with a notebook open on her lap. Karen called the meeting to order. She started with a summary of the situation. Her summary: "As many of you know, we've received a notice of violation from the county regarding snow removal operations along the eastern perimeter of the subdivision. The notice claims that snow deposited in the drainage swale has created an obstruction and is causing flooding on an adjacent property. I want to assure everyone that this is a misunderstanding. The drainage swale in question is part of the community's stormwater infrastructure. It is identified on our plat maps as common area. The snow removal operations were conducted in accordance with our approved snow management plan. The flooding on the adjacent property is not caused by our operations. It is caused by the property owner's failure to maintain her own drainage system." She looked at me. "Mrs. Carver has been making complaints about the snow removal since November. She has been asked repeatedly to provide documentation supporting her claim that the swale is on her property. She has not done so. Instead, she has called the county, hired a pump contractor, and threatened legal action against the HOA. I believe this is an attempt to shift responsibility for her own drainage problems onto the community." She paused. The room was quiet. Some of the residents were nodding. Others looked uncertain. Karen smiled. Now, I've asked the board to consider a resolution authorizing legal counsel to respond to the county violation and to defend the HOA against any claims from Mrs. Carver. I'm confident that once we present our plat maps and our snow management plan, the violation will be dismissed and this matter will be resolved. She looked at the board president, a man named Howard Prentice. Howard, I move that we authorize legal counsel. Howard nodded. Is there a second? One of the other board members raised a hand. Second? Howard said. Discussion? I stood up. I'd like to speak. Karen's smile tightened. Mrs. Carver, this is a board meeting. Residents will have an opportunity to comment after the board has discussed the resolution. I didn't sit down. I'm not a resident. I'm the property owner whose land has been damaged by your snow removal operations. I have documentation that I think the board and the residents should see before you vote on anything. Karen said, Mrs. Carver, if you have documentation, you can submit it to the board for review. That's the proper procedure. I looked at her. I've been asked to submit documentation 4 times since November. Each time, I've been told that the board will review it. Each time, nothing has happened. I'm not submitting anything tonight. I'm presenting it to everyone. I opened the folder. I pulled out the first document. This is the county drainage map, certified by the county surveyor's office. It shows the drainage swale along the eastern edge of my property. The swale is highlighted in blue. The property boundary is highlighted in red. As you can see, the swale is entirely within my property lines. It is not on HOA property. It is not common area. It is private land. I held up the map so everyone could see it. Karen said, that map is not the same as the HOA plat. The HOA plat clearly shows the drainage corridor as common area. Tom Berglund stood up. Ma'am, I'm Tom Berglund, County Drainage Inspector. The county drainage map is the official record. It's based on the original survey from 1972, when the swale was dug. The HOA plat was created in 2018, 50 years later. If there's a discrepancy between the two, the county map controls. That's state law. Karen's face went still. Tom continued. I inspected the swale on March 17th. I confirmed that it is a protected drainage feature on private property. I also confirmed that snow deposited by HOA plow trucks has created an obstruction that is causing flooding on the adjacent property. That's why I issued the notice of violation. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a drainage violation, and it needs to be fixed. The room was very quiet now. The residents who had been nodding earlier were no longer nodding. Howard Prentice looked at Karen. Karen, did you know the swale was on private property? Karen said, I reviewed the HOA plat. The plat shows it as common area. I relied on the plat. I pulled out the second document. This is the snowplow contract that the HOA signed with Rigsby Snow Removal in October of last year. I requested a copy of this contract in November, in December, in January, and in February. I was never given one. Mr. Rigsby was kind enough to bring a copy tonight. I held up the contract. The contract includes a map of designated snow storage areas. One of those areas is labeled Eastern Drainage Swale. The map shows the swale as HOA property, but it's not. It's my property. And the contract was signed by the facilities chair. I looked at Karen. You signed this contract. You directed the plow trucks to dump snow on my land for 4 months, without my permission, without any legal right. And now my barn is flooding. Karen's face had gone pale. Her clipboard was clutched against her chest. She said, I relied on the plat. I didn't know the swale was private property. This is not my fault. Dale Rigsby stood up. He was holding the manila envelope. Ma'am, I've got something to say. Everyone turned to look at him. He cleared his throat. I've been plowing for the HOA for 3 winters. Every year, they give me a map and tell me where to put the snow. This year, the map showed the swale as a storage area. They told me it was HOA property. I didn't know it wasn't. But I do know that Mrs. Whitmore called me in November and told me to make sure the snow went into the swale. She said there had been a complaint from the property owner and that I should ignore it. She said the swale was HOA property and that the property owner was just being difficult. He looked at Karen. Those were your words. Just being difficult. Karen's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Dale continued. I've got the call log on my phone. November 19th, 8:47 a.m. Duration, 6 minutes. I remember the call because it was the first time anyone from the HOA had ever called me directly about where to put the snow. Usually they just let the contract speak for itself. But she called. She wanted to make sure I knew. He held up the envelope. I've also got a copy of the contract and the map. I'm happy to provide them to anyone who wants to see them. The room erupted. Residents started talking all at once. Some were angry at Karen. Some were confused. Some were asking questions about liability and insurance, and whether the HOA was going to be sued. Howard Prentice banged a gavel on the table. Order! Order! We need to handle this properly. He looked at Karen. Karen, I think you need to step down from the facilities chair position while we investigate this. Karen said, I did nothing wrong. I relied on the plat. The plat was wrong. That's not my fault. Howard said, the plat was created by the developer. You've been facilities chair for 2 years. You had access to the county records. You could have checked. You didn't check. And now the HOA is facing a county violation, potential legal action, and who knows how much in damages. This is a serious problem. Diane Okonkwo walked into the clubhouse. She was holding a printed estimate. She handed it to me. I looked at it. The number was larger than I had expected. I handed it to Howard. This is the preliminary damage estimate from my insurance adjuster. The flooding has reached the barn foundation. There's water in the crawl space. The estimate includes foundation repair, mold remediation, drainage restoration, and temporary pumping costs. The total is $47,000. Howard stared at the paper. The room went silent again. Karen said, That's not possible. The snow hasn't even melted yet. I looked at her. The snow has been melting for 2 weeks. The water has been rising for 2 weeks. You would know that if you had ever come out to look at the swale instead of just looking at your plat map. Marcus Webb stood up from the back of the room. I've been pumping water off her property for 3 days. I've moved over 20,000 gallons. The water is coming from the blocked swale. There's no other source. The swale was designed to carry meltwater away from the barn. When you blocked it, you sent the water into the barn. It's that simple. He looked at Karen. I've been doing drainage work for 15 years. I've never seen an HOA dump snow on someone's private swale and then blame the property owner for the flooding. That's a new one. Karen didn't respond. She was staring at the table in front of her. Her clipboard was still clutched against her chest. The laminated map was still on the easel. The map that showed the swale as HOA property. The map that was wrong. Howard Prentice took a deep breath. I'm going to call for a vote on the resolution to authorize legal counsel. But before I do, I want to make a statement. He looked at me. Mrs. Carver, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize. It appears that the HOA has been dumping snow on your property without authorization. It appears that our facilities chair directed the contractor to ignore your complaints. And it appears that our plat map contains an error that contributed to this situation. We will investigate. We will cooperate with the county. And we will work with our insurance company to address the damages. I can't promise a specific outcome tonight, but I can promise that we will take this seriously. He looked at Karen. Karen, I'm asking you to resign as facilities chair, effective immediately. If you don't resign, I will call for a vote to remove you. Karen didn't move. She didn't speak. She just sat there, clutching her clipboard, staring at the table. Howard said, All in favor of removing Karen Whitmore from the facilities chair position, raise your hand. Every board member raised their hand. Howard said, The motion carries. Karen, you are no longer facilities chair. Please provide all HOA documents and records to the management office by tomorrow. Karen stood up. She didn't look at anyone. She walked out of the clubhouse. The door closed behind her. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the residents started talking again. Some of them were looking at me with new expressions. Not annoyance anymore. Something closer to respect. Or maybe guilt. Sarah Chen walked up to me. I'm sorry, she said. I should have believed you in November. I should have asked more questions. I told her it was okay. I told her the important thing was that the truth was out now. Tom Berglund shook my hand. Good work, he said. You handled that better than most people would have. Most people would have been out there with a shovel in November, trying to dig the snow out themselves. You waited. You documented. You let the system work. I told him the system only worked because he showed up with the county map. He smiled. The map was always there. You just needed someone to read it. Dale Rigsby was still standing by his chair, holding the manila envelope. He looked relieved. I'm glad that's over, he said. I've been worried about this since December. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do. I told him he did the right thing. I told him bringing the contract was the most important thing he could have done. He nodded. I'm going to revise my contract for next year. I'm going to require a survey before I dump snow anywhere. I don't want this to happen again. I told him that was a good idea. The meeting ended around 9 o'clock. I walked out to the parking lot. The night was cold and clear. The snow piles were still there, but they were shrinking. The melt was accelerating. The water was still rising. But now the HOA knew, the county knew, the residents knew, and Karen was gone. The next morning, I received a call from the HOA's insurance company. They wanted to schedule an inspection of the barn. I gave them Diane Okonkwo's contact information. 2 days later, the HOA board voted to hire a contractor to clear the snow blockage from the swale. Marcus Webb got the job. He brought in an excavator and spent 2 days removing the compacted snow and ice. The water started flowing again. The pond near the barn started shrinking. By the end of March, the swale was clear. The drainage path was restored. The barn was drying out. The foundation repairs took longer. The HOA's insurance company eventually agreed to cover the damages. The final settlement was $43,000, which covered the foundation repair, the mold remediation, the pumping costs, and my insurance deductible. The HOA also paid the county fine for the drainage violation, $2,500. Karen Whitmore did not go quietly. She sent a letter to all HOA residents claiming that she had been scapegoated, that the plat map error was the developer's fault, that she had acted in good faith, and that the board had betrayed her. A few residents supported her, most did not. She tried to run for the board again in the fall election. She lost by a wide margin. She sold her house the following spring. I still live on the property. The barn is still standing. The swale is still flowing. I still have the folder. It's thicker now. It includes the county violation notice, the insurance settlement, the board meeting minutes, and a copy of the revised snowplow contract that Dale Rigsby sent me. The new contract includes a clause requiring the contractor to verify property boundaries before depositing snow. It also includes a map that correctly shows the swale as private property. I keep the folder in the kitchen, on the same shelf where my grandfather kept his drainage records. Sometimes I take it down and look through it. Not because I'm angry, because I want to remember. I want to remember that when someone tells you to submit documentation, they're not asking for proof. They're asking for ammunition. I want to remember that the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be written down. And I want to remember the look on Karen's face when she realized that the map she had been relying on for 2 years was wrong. That the authority she thought she had was never real. That the snow she had been dumping for 4 months was going to melt. And when it did, it was going to wash her away. The last thing I added to the folder was a photograph. It was taken in April, after the swale was cleared and the barn was repaired. The photograph shows the swale running clear and full, carrying meltwater away from the barn toward the low area on the far side of the property. The grass is starting to green up. The trees are starting to bud. The barn is dry and solid. And on the edge of the swale, where the snow piles used to be, there's a new sign. It's a small metal sign, driven into the ground with a steel post. It says, "Private property, protected drainage feature. No dumping." I didn't put it there, the county did. Tom Berglund installed it himself. He said it was standard procedure after a drainage violation. I think he just wanted to make sure no one ever made the same mistake again. I drink my coffee on the porch now and look at that sign. And I think about my grandfather. I think about him digging the swale by hand in 1972, when he was 53 years old, when the barn was new, and the property was just a dairy farm with a drainage problem. I think about him explaining to me how the swale worked, how the water needed a path, how you couldn't just block it and expect it to go away. I think about him saying, "Water doesn't care about property lines. Water goes where water goes. Your job is to give it somewhere to go that doesn't destroy what you've built." He was right. He was right about the water. He was right about the swale. And he was right about something else. Something he never said out loud, but that I understood anyway. The land remembers. The land remembers who dug the ditch. The land remembers who planted the trees. The land remembers who built the barn. And when someone comes along with a clipboard and a laminated map and a condescending smile and tries to claim what isn't theirs, the land doesn't argue. The land just waits. And then the snow melts, and the truth comes out, and the water finds its way home.